I'll start off with some very deep analysis that I have for you here, and that is 4-0 is better than 3-1. So I know that's hard to grasp for a lot of people, but I'll throw that out there.
Justin, we're going to send you to Vegas because is 4-0 better than 1-2?
4-0
is definitely, according to Vegas, not better than 1-2. I believe those Badgers are a favorite.
They are. Well, they started as a favorite. I actually looked at the Barstool Sportsbook this morning, and it had already swung from -1.5 Wisconsin to -1.5 Michigan. So a lot of movement there. I'm really intrigued by that line just in general because obviously people think that Wisconsin's not great, due to what happened on Saturday in the past 3 weeks. But you look at what Michigan has done on the road, specifically in Madison, but also just on the road against any decent team under Jim Harbaugh, and it's not gone well. So I don't know. I think there are a lot of bettors out there. I'm surprised that it moved towards Michigan is what I would say there.
Yeah, we'll get to the matchup with Wisconsin. I think it's very easy to take either side and see why that team would be the favorite. Of course, Michigan's winning the games. They're very similar teams in their approaches. Wisconsin's losing games, but I think it's understandable, and people still know that it's Wisconsin football, and they're good. They just have some issues to clean up. When I look at the Rutgers game, it was basically as though these teams switched uniforms at halftime. Michigan dominated the first half, but couldn't run away from Rutgers. Rutgers was just stout enough on defense to keep holding up the one big pass play for the touchdown. But besides that, held up well against Michigan, but the Wolverines dominating on the stat sheet. Second half, I was astounded, and I was in and out of this game, but I was astounded at the numbers that Rutgers put up from a standpoint of yardage and first down advantage in the second half. But again, they didn't have enough to make the dynamic plays to turn it in their favor.
You're right. It was pretty astonishing. And I've described it I was in the stands watching the game, and the fans of Michigan they were into it all game, but they were annoyed in the second half that they had to be into it. And I think that's how I felt as well. It was like, what happened in the first half? They went into halftime. It was almost as if Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator for Michigan, fell asleep and was like, we don't need to do anything. We'll be good. Let's run the clock out for an entire half. If you want to do that for the last 5 minutes, last 8 minutes, sure. When you're up by 3 scores, that's great. But you're up by 3 scores at halftime against a Big Ten opponent who's 3-0 under Greg Schiano, who's a great coach. They're not just going to roll over. This is not Rutgers of old. It really isn't. And so I think they're a decent team still, but I think Michigan still should have won. They probably should have covered the spread of 20.5 or whatever it ended up at. And so it was just very odd because, like you said, in the first half, they looked like they picked up where they left off from last week against Northern Illinois. And then in the second half, it was run up the gut, make a bad throw, 3 and out. 4 or 5 straight times, and then all of a sudden it's a 1-score game, and everyone's like, what happened here?
We got the answer to our question in regards to, can anybody stop the Michigan running game? I don't know that they stopped the Michigan running game, but they did for a relatively large period of time. I guess the entire second half they did. So what was Michigan going to do to counter? Well, what Michigan did to counter was bleed the clock and play good enough defense. They didn't counter the way people would want them to in terms of turning to a passing game. They could light up a defense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that I think we had talked about it on here, but everyone was wondering, all right, when you go against Big Ten opponents, I think most people thought it was going to be this upcoming week against Wisconsin. Their defensive line in front 8 that we would see, all right, what's going to happen when somebody stops the run? But it happened a week prior, which I think ultimately is going to end up as a good thing for Michigan because they have to sound the alarms all week prepping for Wisconsin. But going back to the Rutgers game, I definitely agree. You would have hoped to see Josh Gaddis go to that creativity that we had talked about, that we had seen the spurts of from this Michigan offense, where they throw the ball downfield, they get the ball to their weapons in space, they get it to Blake Corum around the edge. And we saw that there were a couple times at the end of the fourth quarter when they needed to put it away that they did get it to their guys, and all of a sudden it was like, holy cow, that worked. Why haven't we been doing that? It turns out when Greg Schiano stacks 8, 9 in the box, you can't run it with Blake Corum up the middle. And so, I mean, I think looking at Cade McNamara's numbers, it's really frustrating. I don't want to blame Cade McNamara for this game. I think there are a lot of people out here calling for J.J. McCarthy. Now, Cade he made his mistakes for sure. He had a few really bad throws. He also had a few really good throws. And I don't think I would rather blame it, I think, on the play calling and not putting him in a position for success rather than putting this whole second half on Cade McNamara's shoulders. But ultimately, 9 for 16, 163 yards is not good. And you're going to need to throw the ball at some point. And I think the more frustrating thing for myself is only one completion in the second half. That's a problem. You can't do that no matter who you're playing against for Cade McNamara. And then the other thing is not one player on Michigan's offense had more than 2 catches. You have to get the ball to your weapons. I like spreading the ball around, I do, but I mean, when you have guys like Cornelius Johnson, Eric All is a mismatch nightmare for a lot of linebackers and safeties out there. Get him the ball. And so that's what was more frustrating when when the run game isn't working, but you still give it to Blake Corum 21 times and not try to get it to some other weapons where you have them all over the offense. That's what was more frustrating watching on Saturday.
Yeah, there's a balance to it. Every team should have playmakers that are the primary guys, but you don't want one guy catching the ball. I can think of particular teams that had one guy catching 85 passes and the next guy had 18. That's not necessarily the best route to go and typically not going to get it done. Right. But you have guys that are the go-to guys. They should be the best players that are getting their hands on the ball more than twice, you would think, in a 20-13 game. So, Justin, basically, if we stay on the offensive side, based on what was stated after the game, and of course, we're too early to hear what Jim Harbaugh is saying in his weekly news conference about it, just in regards to what the explanation was for not running the football well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting what Jim wants to say here and what Josh Gaddis will say as well. But I think that this offensive line didn't play as well as they have in the past few games. And so you have to understand, when you rely on an offensive line to create holes time after time after time, after 4 games, you're going to find some plays where they don't, block as well. I also think this was one of the worst games from a running back read standpoint as well. There were a lot of holes that were there that the running backs just didn't read the right guy, or they didn't go off the butt of their blocker. And so I don't want to put it on either one there, but I think it's a shared blame of this offensive line and the running backs there, where, there were certain holes. They weren't as wide as we've seen in the past 3 games, but they were there and they just took a cut a wrong way. I saw multiple times there on a 3rd and 1 or a 2nd and 2 or something like that, which put Michigan in those holes. Now, that's what scares a lot of people, myself included, when you're about to go up against a Wisconsin team who's going to have a much better defensive front than Rutgers. You're not going to be able to push those guys around, as much. So you need to be creative and make holes. But if you can't make those holes, go back to that creativity. You have Blake Corum, who he can get to the edge and turn it upfield. Let him do that. They had to, they were using AJ Henning in that speed sweep option a lot as well, and we didn't see that, and so I think that part is frustrating that you didn't have those guys involved. I'll also say this, they're doing the read option, obviously, with Cade McNamara, but at some point when he gives 99% of the time, that's not a thing anymore, right? And so it's just a run up the gut. And so I think that where some teams in the past 3 games, because they hadn't seen Michigan's offense yet, they had to cover the quarterback on the read option. Now Rutgers sold out completely to the running back. Cade still gives. Well, there's 3 guys in the hole then that can meet him there.